Welcome back, and joining me for a closer look at what's played out on the market scene today is Jacobus Brink from Schimidt Family Office. Thank you so much for your time, Jacobus. I must say I am pleasantly surprised by the Resources 10 complex today. Those resources up by almost 5% on the day, and we're seeing actually a number of commodity companies up, gold companies, diversified miners. What is happening? Has the time for an upward cycle finally come?
Yeah, hi, thanks so much. Great to be on the show again. I think, there's a sort of a broad macro commodity trade going on. Even with the weaker dollar that we've seen over the past number of weeks, months actually.
Yeah.
We have seen a bit of a rally in commodity prices, but I also think, a lot of it has been company specific today. The things like Sibanye, it's been doing well today. I think just sort of a general commodity story. We also saw some positive developments out of China from an infrastructure point of view. So iron ore has been rallying. Just a good day all in all for commodities, and we think that it could still squeeze a little bit higher from here going into the end of the year.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's funny because I've actually just noticed it now that as much as the resources are up, the retailers are surprisingly down, and because usually when the retailers are down, it usually goes with rand weakness, but the rand has actually remained stable. Has there been anything specific that's come out? I see TFG down almost 4%, SPAR 3%, Truworths, Mr. Price, all in the red.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like you correctly said, it normally sort of tends to offset each other, and we didn't really see a massive rally in the rand or anything on the back of the strong gold and other precious metals prices. But I think in general, I suppose the only real sector that is possibly reflecting some local concerns is the retail sector. The entire retail sector, may possibly with the exclusion of Lewis, has been very weak year to date. I think we could get some early indications of how the consumer is doing with the Mr. Price results we're seeing later in the week. So I think the market will sort of keep a keen eye on that one, to gauge, how the SA consumer is doing.
Yeah, and actually quite an interesting point that you make there. With the exception of Lewis, we know that the momentum of Lewis has just been firing on. Well, let's take a look at some of the specific news that came out from the commodity sector. We did have South 32 putting out a quarterly activities report saying that copper production basically has been the star of the show. And actually not even just for South 32, for all these diversified miner, copper coming out on top there. South 32 saying that it expects to exceed, it has exceeded its FY25 production guidance. Of course, that stock surging about 7%, even with the impairment that they will be recognizing for Mosul Aluminium, seeming that investors are shrugging that off. Are investor confidence levels here facing north?
They are indeed facing north for South 32. Yeah, no, as you mentioned, beat guidance by 102%, so substantial. The shares up, quite excessively today. As you mentioned, they had a substantial increase in the copper production specifically, and also in aluminium, which is great. It's also actually demonstrated quite a resilient recovery post Cyclone Megan, and I think from here on out, the outlook for 2026 will probably hinge on cost control, as far as we're concerned. So the market obviously loving that results, and just in line with all of the precious metals and all of the industrial metals rallying, that obviously gave it a bit of an extra boost.
Indeed. Well, let's get on to Sibanye-Stillwater that also had a boost today. Of course, no stranger to acquisitions. The company is back on the acquisition trail, and it's buying a company called Metallics Refining for, is it $82 million? I do understand that the transaction is not a categorized transaction under the JSE. But I don't know, would you say that this is a small but significant transaction for Sibanye?
No, I think so. It's quite an interesting one. If you take what Sibanye is doing, with the announcement of this acquisition versus someone like Jubilee, clearly two very different views on sort of strategic views on, where this complex could be going from here on out. Jubilee, obviously, wanting to disinvest out of the entire South African business.
Yeah.
So I think, this obviously does indicate sort of a strategic intent from the Sibanye side. And it's a good thing, as I mentioned earlier. I think with the dollar weakness that we've seen and we possibly could continue to see, they're obviously taking a longer term strategic view on the precious metal sector. And, I think it's a good one. And other than that, Metalix actually, despite being a fairly smallish company, they do have a global consumer base. They also service it out of the UK and South Korea. So, interesting one indeed.
All right. Well, another interesting one is, of course, the deal between Remgro and Vodacom on Massive. We had an announcement out on a Friday, of course, about the updated terms on the transaction. That's still going on. Even this has been going on since 2021, Jacobus, almost 4 years in the making. They also had an investor call today, and they have an appeal hearing, actually tomorrow, the 22nd of July. What can you take out from the current proposal and developments, considering how long this has been in the works? Are we finally reaching the end of the road here?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think, we might actually have some light at the end of the tunnel here. And, we're of the opinion that the deal will probably be approved. And I think in general, it is both for a good deal for both companies.
Yeah.
It obviously gives Vodacom a bit of an extra scale. And Remgro, it frees up capital for Remgro. So, we saw both of those counters actually up at the start of the day. Remgro, I think there was a bit of profit taking along with the larger financial sector. But I think in general, a good deal for both of those companies.
All right. Well, actually, let's get to your stock pick. I was going to go to Rainet, but also they just released about an update, a 1-2-liner talking about their net asset value. But I'm sure we'll be talking about that on Stockwatch as well in the coming days. Let's get to your stock pick for today. Jacobus, what are you choosing?
Yeah, so staying with the telecoms play, my stock pick for today is Blue Label Telecoms. I think just in general, it is quite an underappreciated stock at this stage. There obviously were a lot of issues going back a number of years, and I think, it sort of fell off the radar of a lot of investors. As a family office, we like to go and look for these opportunities that the market's not necessarily seeing that value. So now if you just compare it, on a market cap basis, it's currently trading still at, despite the fact that it's up 160% year to date, it's still trading at half of what something like Telkom's trading at. And, free cash flow is pretty much in the same vicinity. So we think, once we get more clarity around the Cell C IPO, I think they'll be going on a roadshow towards September this year.
Yeah.
And I think, it's an underappreciated one. You don't typically see someone punting a stock that with a chart that looks like the one on the screen.
Yeah.
But it pulled back a little bit today, so we always buy a bit on red. So
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Telecoms it is.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights on what has moved investors' money today, Jacobus. Really appreciate your time. That was Jacobus Brink from Schimidt Family Office.